Okay, I have received a lot of requests to do Diddy Kong Racing DS's Pirate Lagoon in the Nintendo 64 style. And for a while, I had kind of just given up on the idea and thought it was impossible. But then I just started getting ideas. Crazy little ideas about how I could make this work. And so, rather than just put it out there and be like, oh, here's the next one, you ungrateful little mackerels, you. I figured, I should actually show the behind-the-scenes process about why in the first place this one was so difficult to make, and how I managed to creatively push myself to figure out a unique solution to the problem. I still don't think it sounds amazing. I did the best that I could with the tools that I had and the know-how, but I think it still resulted in something that's passable as an N64 styled remix, and so I wanted to share this creative process with you guys. So the first thing that I did a way long time ago and forgot to record, so there's no footage of, is that I used a sound font and MIDI ripper to, rip the music straight out of the ROM of the game, as well as like the sound fonts and stuff, just so I could tinker with it and see what all is supposed to sound like what in the final product. And I'm very particular about wanting to rip MIDIs from the soundtracks, because back in the day when I used to do all of my MIDI remixes, I would just go on the internet and find ones that were, composed by hand by an actual musician. I would just be like taking their work and then changing the sound font. I don't really like to do that anymore, but I still don't know much myself about writing music. So what I prefer to do instead is rip the MIDI data straight out of a game and then remix that. Because obviously it's going to be transformative upon the original work of the person that made the music in the first place. But this way I'm not like ripping off somebody who worked hard to create a MIDI from scratch, So with that, we actually have some footage here. This is me working in FL Studio. And the first thing we got to do is import the raw MIDI data into FL Studio, adjust some settings and all that. And now, when I hit play, this is what the MIDI sounds like. That's really upsetting, right? You're like, oh, I can like kind of hear a melody that kind of sounds like Pirate Lagoon, but there's just this cacophony of sound. It's so jarring and unpleasant, and it just gets worse the longer you listen to it. Okay, so about that and what's happening here. When you rip the MIDI data straight from the game has its own like set of instruments that it can play, each of these different sets of like notes and stuff from. But we are playing this through a MIDI sequencer, which does not have all those instruments. If I also ripped the sound font, I could go in and replace these MIDI instruments with the sound font from the games, or, as I try to do, replace them with the sound font of a different game, in this case, the N64 Diddy Kong Racing. So yeah, the issue here is just that the raw data doesn't have the right instruments assigned to everything, so it just sounds like this explosion of ear-shattering cacophonous nonsense, and we don't want it to sound like that. We want it to sound like a beautiful thing. So with pretty much all the other remixes that I did in the N64 style, I would take the regular MIDI data and then change the instruments to match the instruments of the N64 soundtrack. But this wouldn't always work, because certain sound banks are not actually note for note what they're supposed to be. In this case, this is like the drums. That is not like the correct sound bank for that. I can't just like put the drums in and they work. These are the specific drums that were made for this in the game. You can hear that sort of like cowbell sound. And so that's sort of what the problem is. It's not like, oh, you can take any drum sound font and slap it over a thing. The specific issue is that they made it so that each note on the piano roll plays a specific drum sound, and it's not the same between all drum kits. And so what I would usually do to kind of finagle these aren't like one-to-one, they would work on an N64 or anything like that. What I would do is just compare the notes to see what is like the closest sounding drum out of the N64 sound font, and then move that MIDI data over to that drum set. But in cases like these, the N64 drum set from the original Diddy Kong Racing only had so much stuff because they were just trying to make a general drum set that would work with all of their songs. Whereas for Diddy Kong Racing DS, they made multiple drum sets for like individual songs. In this case here, the stuff like the cowbells and some of the other interesting exotic types of drums we'll hear later in the song. And so it kind of took some finagling, some figuring out how to make that work. Another one of these, not even talking about the drums, they also do this with instruments sometimes. You'll especially notice this on my remixes of the custom tracks, where there's that little like synth pattern. That is not just like a single instrument that will play the notes as they're laid out on the MIDI keyboard. With those, each note makes a specific sound, and you have to put them all... They all kind of fit together like a puzzle piece. You put them in the right order, play them in the right sequence, and it makes a little wavy synth sound. And the N64 sound font has nothing like that can replicate that. So I just have to use the one from the DS sound font. But in this case, with instruments and stuff, and specifically with Pirate Lagoon, most of the song is like this. Most of the song has these like pre-made instruments where you get a specific sound out of it by hitting a specific note. And the N64 doesn't exactly have a match to that. You will see this very particular instance that I have here is what is supposed to be this sort of like rock organ sound at the beginning of Pirate Lagoon. It's like the most recognizable part of the song. So if I just go in and set this to the classic rock organ instrument from N64, and then just try and have it play the notes, it'll sound like this. And you can tell that's not what the song is supposed to sound like, so I can't just flip the instruments and make it go, because the MIDI data doesn't match the actual sound that the song is supposed to have. Whereas, hey, you listen to this, that one actually sounds right. This is the one from the DS sound font. And so you see what I mean, where you can't just switch the instruments, you gotta use the right instrument. So getting the rest of the MIDI data that doesn't do that, with the drums and the organ and whatever, this is as close as I could get the song, just importing instruments and assigning them to MIDI data without changing any of the notes. We've got the steel drums here. And a quick tangent about that instrument there. That steel drum sound is actually not from the Diddy Kong Racing soundtrack, because in the sound font, In the N64 sound font for Diddy Kong Racing, the steel drums don't quite sound as good. They don't quite match how they are in the DS version. It sounds a little off. So what I ended up using was the steel drums from the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time sound font, because those are a closer match to that sound, but it still has the N64 sound to it. This is why when I do my N64 style remixes, they are not one-to-one and would not work in-game with, N64 hardware or whatever, because I take a lot of creative liberties in using instruments from various things just to kind of create the vibe of an N64 styled remix without actually using strictly the sound font and the limitations. You got the bass there. You can tell, it sounds very empty. Most of that is due to not having the drums there for a lot of this. You can see a lot of this empty space here. There's all these instruments we can't use. We got this here. This is a personal stylistic choice. I know not everybody is going to like this. I chose to use the harmonica for this part because I felt it sounded nicer here, even though the original is not a harmonica. Using those, the marimba as the backing, and then the rock guitar instrument as the lead here. This actually does sound pretty nice. You can tell it's because we got a melody and then a counter melody. It sounds a little bit nicer. But then it's we're still out of drums, we don't have the organ, we don't have everything else. It's still pretty shallow. But yeah, that's about as far as I could get just using the MIDI data and not tweaking the drums and not doing anything with the organ. So I used a pretty funny little technique. As you can see here, I'm deleting all of the different instruments. So the only instrument that is going to be here is this this rock organ from the DS sound font, exactly as it's supposed to go. This was the creative solution that I came up with to get this instrument to play its sound from the game. So you see there's no other instruments there, right? So I went into the settings and just exported this single sound. Export it as an MP3 file. And now we have an MP3 that's just that ding, 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 ding. So from here, I went to the dreaded converting an MP3 to a MIDI. If you've ever tried to do this with just a regular song, it sounds horrible. And part of the reason why it sounds so horrible is because of the drums. It converts those into MIDI piano data, and it just sounds irritatingly bad. And it's all these different instruments it's trying to account for. But in this case, we only have a single instrument. This organ here. Getting messages on Discord, ugh. Okay, but you hear what I mean. Don't check your Discord. We've got just the bass notes there. And so now I'm going to import that into an MP3 MIDI converter. And so it's going to make a MIDI file that is just those single notes. So now we'll play back that. Oh. You can tell it's not perfect. It's not a one-to-one recreation. It still sounds a little messy, but we'll import it here into FL Studio. And now with this MIDI data, we will add the N64 sound font to it, and we'll put the rock organ. Oh, that sounds a little closer, doesn't it? And so one of the other things that I did, it doesn't sound exactly the same, but I found this like whistle instrument it's used for like Conqueror's theme and stuff. This one actually works surprisingly well. And so what I did is I combined the rock organ with the whistle and then kind of adjusted like the volume on both so they sound pretty equal. And it pretty accurately recreates close enough the sound of the organ from the original. If anybody has a better solution for this, or like would just want to rewrite the drums entirely, I say go right ahead, like do this better than me. If you know how to do it better than me, please do it better than me. This is just something I did because I wanted to hear how it sounded. I never expected this to blow up and become a really popular thing.
Well done, shrimp!
Okay, so that mostly covers what I wanted to talk about with the creative process. I know for a lot of people when they do MIDI remixes, and I'm not judging because this is where I started making MIDI remixes too, but it is simply just a matter of like slapping an instrument onto MIDI data and being like, I made a remix, and like I said, I don't shame that because that's a good starting point. I'm still using MIDI rips from soundtracks, but I really try and put in as much effort as I can to make something that is my own with these remixes. And this is also why I encourage anybody else to try and rearrange the DS soundtracks, because this all started from the fact that I wasn't satisfied with how they sounded, and so I wanted to make something that sounded more satisfying like the original N64 soundtrack. And like that's the thing about Pirate Lagoon specifically, like anybody who's read my comments and like heard me express my thoughts on the matter knows I really don't like this one compared to the Pirate Lagoon from the N64 version. That one's got way more life and fun. It's better suited for a racing game. This one is kind of more chill. It's a pleasant song, but I just don't think it matches the excitement of that original composition that David Wise did. So I don't even know why in the first place he decided to change it. But that said, I had gotten a lot of requests to do this one. I'm not normally a guy that enjoys taking orders. I am very much stubborn and set in my ways, and I do things how I want to do them. But when I was thinking about how I would even breach the task of doing this, I was thinking to myself, maybe this is possible. So now that I've figured out this technique, I can use it in more stuff going forward. But for now, like, even though the quality on some of these is not as good as they could be, I have technically done all the songs. And so I want to make this not just to be like, y'all are ungrateful, never ask me for anything ever again. Even though I kind of do feel that way. You'll notice in the actual Pirate Lagoon video, there is like a couple of frames of this slightly transparent image of Sakurai with the text, never ask me for anything ever again. Because this was such a labor effort to get something that I didn't want to make, but people wanted to see me make. And so you always get some of that trademark Purple Cheese Man stubbornness that I approach anything I don't want to do with. But even so, like, I wanted to make this video as a way of showing that, like, hey, I had some fun figuring out how to make this work, even though it was difficult. So now that you've seen the behind-the-scenes stuff, please go check out the actual video with the remix, please listen to it, please enjoy it. And for those that are here mostly for the Diddy Racing DS remix stuff, I hope you'll stick around and check out the rest of my channel. I promise the podcast is really fun, and a lot of the passion that went into making these remixes is stuff that I carry forward into all of the stuff that I do. And so I hope that you'll enjoy all of that. There's probably a more coherent way to say that, but I'm tired of trying to record and re-record this outro, so thanks for watching. Have a good one.